That was my goal, to get to the basement, However, on my way to the basement, there was a barrage of bullets just coming from everywhere.
Breaking news coverage continuing tonight at 6 here on KDKA. An active shooter situation turned into an hours-long standoff, and it just ended within the past hour with the suspect's death. Hundreds of law enforcement officers rushed to Garfield after a man opened fire on the sheriff's deputies who came to evict him.
Our KDKA News team is still on the ground in that neighborhood, as we have been since this started at about 11 o'clock this morning, gathering all the details from authorities, from neighbors, from those who knew the suspect.
KDKA has been on this minute by minute since this morning, keeping you informed every step of the way.
And right now we're going to start with KDKA lead investigator Andy Sheehan. You've been with us here all day talking to your sources, and really key in unraveling a timeline in all of this and a potential motive in terms of what sparked this today with the suspect.
Just an incredible day, an incredible amount of gunfire in a residential neighborhood, and just as miraculous is the fact that the only injury that we know of is a sheriff deputy suffered a cut to his head when he evaded gunfire when initially serving an eviction notice on the suspect in this house. What we know is that sheriff deputies shortly before 11 o'clock this morning came to this house with this eviction notice, tried to talk the suspect out of the house. When that was not successful, they used a battering ram, and when they used that battering ram on the front door, they were met with lethal gunfire. The deputies scrambled for cover, took defensive positions. They exchanged hundreds and hundreds of rounds of gunfire with the suspect, pinned down, were engaged in that gun battle until they were relieved and rescued in one case by Pittsburgh SWAT team. During the course of the afternoon, there were several volleys of gunfire between SWAT and this suspect, all initiated by the suspect himself, who, as we just heard from Chief Scarrato, did not avail himself of any opportunity to peacefully surrender himself. The volleys went on for several hours, 2 hours. There was a cessation of that for about 2 hours period. The police believed that he may have been deceased at that point. That was not the case. There was another round of gunfire that came from the house. Police at that point sent a drone into the house where they identified the suspect, where the suspect was. They concentrated their gunfire on the suspect, on that area of the house, and as it turns out, the suspect, we believe, was wounded by that gunfire, and now we have confirmed that he is in fact dead.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, Chief Scarrato was asked if they knew at this early juncture if the suspect died perhaps from a self-inflicted gunshot or was shot by police, and the chief said, we believe, I think the word he used was, the suspect was neutralized in the gunfight.
Correct.
So
that's what the chief confirms, and that's what police believe. They were all through this day very cautious, very trying to use time on their side, very patient with this gunman, and asking him to surrender peacefully, and they would never avail themselves.
Yeah,
the suspect that we see now is William Hardison. We know that his brother had owned the house. We are efforting to find out the situation with the house. The brother had died. The house transferred into other hands, but Mr. Harrison did not avail himself of that eviction warning that was posted by the sheriffs. Now, in the press conference earlier here, Allegheny County Sheriff Kevin Krause said that they had a pre-meeting before executing this eviction notice at the house. They had some information that this may be an especially volatile situation, but the sheriff says they were not prepared for what they faced.
And you early on...
We should have him.
We certainly didn't expect this. Certainly there's factors that go into these types of things. We do. We evaluate, we respond accordingly, but we certainly had no information whatsoever that this individual was this dangerous or that there were firearms in the house.
Although they did go there with a team of 7 deputies.
They did. They were prepared.
In body armor.
In body armor. No, they knew that there was a potential. They didn't have specific information. We had talked earlier in the day from an attorney of the buyers of that house who said that that they knew that he was armed. The sheriff said that they had no information in that regard, but knew that this could be a volatile and potentially violent situation. So ordinarily they would send 2 sheriff deputies to execute an eviction notice like this, but in this case they sent 7, including supervisors in body armor. So there was some anticipation that this might happen.
All right, Andy, your reporting today has been invaluable. Thank you so much. Don't go away just yet, but meantime, we want to switch to Shelley Bortz, one of the first reporters out there on the scene today.
She actually talked to a woman who had to rush to safety inside her own home as those bullets rang out. And Shelley, a lot of people in that neighborhood actually thought it was fireworks.
Yeah, that's correct. In fact, I did too. I was one of the first on the scene, and as I was approaching this corner where we're standing here, I heard what I thought was fireworks, or not what I thought, but that's exactly what it sounded like. I mean, I knew what it was, but when I talked to other people that live near here, that's what they said. They were like, 10:30 in the morning, fireworks, it can't be, and then they realized what it was. But we talked to, her name is Leslie Thompson. She lives directly across the street from where this unfolded, and she was home. She works from home, and she said it was about 10:30 when she heard a barrage of fireworks. And she said, and then she looked out the window and she saw, police at her neighbor's door. She heard screaming, and she knew that something was wrong. And then all of a sudden, she said, bullets started flying. And she describes for us a horrible couple minutes where she's actually dodging bullets, trying to get to her basement door to get to safety. Take a listen to what else she has to say.
No, I called 911 to let them know I was holed up in the basement, and they just told me to stay in the basement until everything was all clear. They reassured me that it was chaotic outside. They had it under control. The perpetrator was not running throughout the neighborhood, because that was my fear. My fear was that he was running throughout the neighborhood, so I was trying to shut my windows so he couldn't get in. So they reassured me that he was contained, and just to stay in the basement until we got the all clear.
Another quick story we heard, there was a gentleman that was visiting his grandparents' grave, which is directly across the street here at Allegheny Cemetery. He said that he was in the cemetery when he heard gunfire. He said he just jumped to the ground and laid face down until he heard a lull in that sound, and then he ran to safety. So those are just a couple of the stories that we've been hearing all day today. Not the ending that anyone anticipated. Of course, no one wanted to hear this, but we're just happy to hear that no one was hurt. Reporting live here in Garfield, back to you guys in the studio.
Shelley, thank you. Yeah, and so many of those stories Shelley was talking about coming from people in the neighborhood who knew that suspect. And meanwhile, loved ones continue to rush to the scene to try and help. Megan Schiller talked with some of them.
Yeah, she joins us now live near the scene in Garfield. Megan.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things that came out of that media briefing is when they said that they didn't even have any successful conversation with this man. I asked, did you make contact? Did you talk? Did you even shout at each other? To which Sheriff Krause said no. As soon as they approached and announced themselves and tried to call him out, that is when they say the gunshots rang out, and they said that they were just taking incoming fire and they had nothing but to run for cover, duck, dive, he said, try to get out of the way, and then eventually returned fire. They also, we asked and we pressed, trying to get more answers as to the increase in security measures that they took when it came to serving this eviction notice. There were 7 guys. Usually there are less. They were wearing more armor. And we asked, did you notify the neighbors? Did you alert them that you were serving this eviction notice and you potentially anticipated violence? And they said they couldn't confirm whether or not neighbors had been notified. When we've been out here all day long, we have talked to people who say they have lived in this neighborhood for years, their entire lives. We talked to one man who said he ran for city council unsuccessfully, but he plans to run again because he said he loves this community and he can't even believe that this is what transpired today. Take a listen.
It was a little quieter, but about twice now I've heard continuous rounds of gunfire. I mean, they must have unloaded hundreds, maybe thousands of rounds, so it's a very scary situation. You never picture this going to happen somewhere so close to you. I mean, you hear about this on the news, and it's just kind of a scary situation.
And I also pressed trying to get more details about the deed to this property where the eviction notice was sold. I said, did you have any knowledge about the fact that that was his family home and that he had maybe possibly in the past expressed that he wanted to stay there and did not want to be removed from the home? They said they were unable to provide information as to that at the time, but family members I talked with said they are not surprised that he would be willing to fight in order to stay in the family home. We did confirm that his name was on the deed of the home and what appears to be his deceased brother's name as well, with the grantee being a company that eventually did get the home back in February for $25,000. Back to you.
All right, Megan, and now to our Chris Hoffman. Chris actually started out in one location, ended up in another when police told all the media to move from that initial spot.
Yeah, trying to keep everybody safe. He's standing by now with a different angle on the scene tonight. Chris, tell us where you are and what's been happening on your end.
Well, we're now at the corner of North Mailvale and Kincaid and Garfield. We've been in the area where pretty much people have been coming just to see or hear what's been going on throughout much of the day. We heard the gunfire, we heard explosions, and we've been hearing from people who are just in shock and disbelief this even happened. We talked with a guy, he lives on Broad Street, a few blocks down from where this all happened, but his sister and nephew live right next door to it all. He said as soon as they had heard it, they were wondering what was going on. They started making calls to family and friends, and then eventually they got evacuated and were able to be safe and away from all of this. Other neighbors that were maybe in the 4900 block, one block away from where it's transpired, they thought they heard firecrackers around 11 in the morning. And then they eventually learned that it was gunshots, and they tried to get out of their homes and stay away from this all just because they didn't know how it was going to go down. Now, other people were still just really in shock and disbelief. I know we say it all the time, but this was really just stunning to people to hear like what some claimed sounded like a war zone going in their own neighborhood. Take a listen to one guy now whose nephew and sister live next door.
I was just wishing for their safety. Everything's okay. Seemed like the police got it somewhat handled. I don't know. So just hope it ends soon.
Yeah, and unfortunately it did end the way it did, but at this point you have a lot of police just still down in the area of North Mailvale as this investigation continues. We haven't seen a lot of urgency like we did earlier in the day. We had officers running around responding after those bursts of fire, the explosions we had heard. Now it's mainly just kind of like an officer here doing traffic and crowd control. We have some other officers and investigators really focusing in the Broad Street area, but there hasn't been that urgency, much more of a calmed matter at this point. People have pretty much gone back to their homes now, having learned what the conclusion of all this is. Live in Garfield, Chris Hoffman, KDKA-TV News.
All right, Chris, we thank you as well for your dedicated coverage out there today. And you can find all of our coverage on this situation, the impact on the community, the suspect, on our website or on the CBS Pittsburgh app. You can find it in your app store.